Town alumni are being urged to come together to tackle the scourge of gender-based violence. An Alumni in Action campaign has been launched by Zellah Fuphe, and the current student, Zellah, by the way, is an alumni. She's launched this along with a current student, that's Sanda Nyoka, to provide support to UCT survivors of gender-based violence. This coming week will mark 2 years since University of Cape Town student Newzroom was murdered by an employee at a local post office in 2019. Luyanda Botha was sentenced to life in prison for the rape and murder of that 19-year-old. Let's speak now to Zellah Fuphe about the Alumni in Action initiative. Zellah, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your patience as we got through the various other developing stories this afternoon. If I can begin with you about what it was that moved you or that sprung you into this action.
Good afternoon, Tembegile, and thank you very much for having me. The trigger for me was Uyinana's brutal murder, and the trauma that I saw Sanda and my other, another child of mine who's at UCT, my goddaughter Tandile, they went through a lot of trauma. And I, like most South Africans, was angry. I felt discouraged. I felt helpless. And for about a year, I agonized about what it is that I could do as an individual. And I thought about survivors of gender-based violence, those that come from less privileged backgrounds, those that don't have the financial means, those that do not have medical aid. And I wondered how it is that they deal with gender-based violence that has been meted on them. And I came up with this idea. I spoke to Sanda about it. She helped me to mobilize the structures at UCT, and we finally launched it in July.
And Zellah, as we speak to you now, we're showing live pictures from Quigley, where a group of young students have gathered today. They are mourning the death and are outraged at the murder of Nosicelo Mthebeni. She was a student at the University of Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape, and it is horrifying when you look at how she was murdered in one of the most brutal ways. Yet 2 years ago, we were having this same conversation about Uyinana, and many young people that we've spoken to in the past 2 years are saying you go from rage to almost a sense of helplessness at what is happening to young women in this country.
That is true, Tembegile. I mean, I was talking to someone earlier this morning, and I said, as a society, at what point do we look ourselves in the mirror and ask, what is it about us that actually creates an environment that leads to people doing this? Women and children in this country are unsafe, and we feel scared and helpless. And I think for me, I got tired of being helpless. I got tired of being angry. And I just felt that I could not wait for somebody else to do something, that I needed to find something that I could do. And this is my way of contributing and helping those that have been affected by gender-based violence. I have partnered with UCT because, as you say, it is my alma mater. And as I said, I know 2 young women who are students at UCT and who were just as affected by Uyinana's murder as I was. And this is to help those survivors who've got post-traumatic stress disorder, who've got complex trauma, to access up to 8 sessions with a psychologist, which will help them then, hopefully, to move on and begin to rebuild their lives and to heal.
And we often, when we speak about gender-based violence, we look at the adult population and children, yes, outside of the bounds of a campus, right? But it is quite rife on campus where young women are either abused or taken advantage of by, in some cases, their first boyfriend in the big city. In some cases, it's a lecturer, it's someone who's in charge of the residence.
Yeah, absolutely. Safer Spaces published an article a couple of years ago that said 12 to 13% of university students feel unsafe walking around campus, and that number is higher for female students. We've seen that COVID has not helped, even though students were actually not on campus most of the time, but UCT has actually recorded higher cases for gender-based violence. So you are absolutely correct. universities are meant to be places where young people find themselves, they challenge themselves, and they build future careers. And the problem with gender-based violence at universities, it's got multiple impacts. Obviously, there's a human aspect to it, which is the physical trauma that is meted out on the survivor. But remember that we are trying to build an equal society where women become more involved in economic activity. Some of these students have to take leave of absence. Some of them don't graduate, which basically means that the transformation agenda suffers. KPMG also published a study about 3 years ago where they spoke about the impact of gender-based violence on this economy. And it's up to 1.3% of GDP. Mm-hmm. That is a very high number. But more than that, Tembegile, an aspect that is just as important is the intergenerational impact of unresolved trauma. People who have not dealt with trauma sometimes struggle to be good mothers to their own kids. They become cold, they become unavailable to their children, and it can actually impact those children as well as those children's children. So we do need to do something. We need to, one, stop gender-based violence. All of us need to do whatever we can to stop it. But when it happens, we have a responsibility. It is in our humanity to actually do something to help survivors to deal with the aftermath of it.
And universities, like most other communities in this country, still battle with a very serious problem when it comes to victim blaming, which is why it's so important, I suppose, for the work that you're bringing in, which is professionals who are able to speak to young women who, with the example you were making, are already worried about losing academic time. But there's also, that is compounded by the fact that when they do come forward, they then have to face questions about why were you on campus alone late at night? Why were you in the boys' residence at a particular hour when this happened?
It speaks to the point I was making about our role as a society, because I think that problem is not just at universities. I mean, I see posts of pastors who post things about young girls and how they should dress and what they shouldn't do or do. And, the question that I always ask is, what's the conversation that we have with boys, with our young men? Because until we confront those conversations, our language, the messaging, we are going to continue having this problem of victims of gender-based violence being blamed for it. Women and children have a right. Safety is a human right. Gender-based violence is a violation of that human right. Mm. And mental health care is a human right. And all of us deserve to be safe and to be happy and to pursue our goals in life.
A quick final one then. Other UCT alumni who may not have been aware of this initiative, how do they get hold of you?
They can get hold of me. I'll give my private email address. It's zellah.fuphe@outlook.com. Or they can get hold of the student support services at UCT or the Alumni Office, which is the Development and Alumni Department.
Zellah Fuphe, good to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tembegile, for the opportunity.